the child with a future foundation. So I guess maybe we can just do a little introduction each, just 10 seconds, like who you are, so Irina knows who is here. I guess everybody knows me. I am the autism advocate, you know, a mother of an autistic child, and I care deeply about Ukrainian kids.
My name's Nadia, and I'm the chair of the Housing Committee at the UCC Toronto branch. And considering the fact that we've had the hardest time finding hosts and apartments for families with autistic children, Liz sits on the committee to advocate, and together we're lobbying all sorts of organizations in the government to assist the families further.
Hello, do you hear me? Sorry. My name is Elena Diachenko. I'm newcomer in Canada, but I have more than 20 years experience of a different program for children. I'm event manager, I'm team building scriptwriter. I worked with children of different age, and I have my own programs to work with them. So that's why I'm here. I will be happy to help.
Okay, I'm Zenya Kushpeta. I can't be helping right now, actually, but I was 25 years volunteer in Ukraine until 2016, and I'm one of the co-founders of Джерело Center in Lviv. And so we're, you know, I'm just, prior to that, I lived in L'Arche, a community for persons with developmental disabilities. So as a result, I'm just very interested in how it's possible to help. Right now, I'm full-time 24/7 a caregiver for my mother at home here who has severe Alzheimer's. So I can't actively maybe help very much, but perhaps I have some contacts and could help in that way.
Okay, and I suppose I'll introduce myself as well to all the listeners. My name is Irina Sergienko. I'm Ukrainian. I've been in Ukraine until April, which is when I fled with my brother to England. I'm the director of Child with Future Foundation, and we've done a lot to campaign for the rights, to provide services, to organize things for families with autistic children and autistic children themselves. So in my lecture, I will be referring to autistic children a lot because, well, it's my specialty, but obviously you will have teens coming in, possibly adults. So most things I say will apply in some way to all ages because everyone's gone through some deeply traumatic things. Right, and I suppose I'll share my screen now. And share. Okay, let's hide everything so you can see what's going on. Please move this. Okay. So first thing you need to realize is that your work starts before the family even gets to Canada. Of course, you won't always have the ability to consult with the families before they arrive, but if you have the opportunity to ask them a few questions, if you have a bit of time to talk to them, specifically families with autistic children, on the screen you see several questions that you need to ask. Now, all of the families are coming in from war, from trauma. Families had to be separated. A lot of them don't know what's going on back home, if their family is okay. So people will be under a lot of stress, and especially mothers who have found themselves to be single moms essentially now, where before they were able to rely on their husbands, on their wider family, on specialists, on whatever was available in their area. And they had things set up. It was usually they have, you know, some form of support, but moving out of the country, they lose all of that support and they find themselves one-on-one with their kids. So when asking the questions, make it clear that it's nice if they can answer all of those. It's beneficial, but don't force them to. At least while they're trying to, you know, get to Canada, get to safety. Now, one of the first issues that everyone finds out when they move countries is the bureaucracy. They don't know how to get services for their kids. They don't know where to ask for them. They don't know what's needed to get them. So if you can sort of prepare it ahead of time, that would be massively helpful. Now, apart from the IEP is the individual educational plan for children and teenagers who go to school. Few will have them because the system was not very widespread in Ukraine just yet. It was starting to get, more popular and more needed across Ukraine. When asking what specialists the kids were seeing back home, you will usually get quite a large range of specialists. You will have someone from the medical side of things, or several someones. You will have a speech therapist. Having some sort of massage specialist is also very common. Having some sort of physical, the physical education kind of teacher is also very common. Could be an ABA or some sort of special, specifically autistic methodologist, could be any number of things. And they may not be available in your area, or in the area where the family will be living in, but maybe there's something similar, or there's something online that they can sign up for. So, there's usually ways around. Knowing sensory needs is very important because it will help you to smooth the transition. As you may know, autistic children, autistic people in general, they tend to have sensitive hearing. They tend to get overwhelmed in places that are big, loud, and unknown. So knowing what helps that person feel safe, what helps that person relax, will help you a lot when receiving the family, because they will need that rest. Now, you have to think smart about this. Some stuff can be covered by other existing organizations. For example, my foundation does not handle giving out things like blankets or food or water, because those are very basic things that a lot of other volunteer organizations do. Likewise with medicine. So back when I was in Kyiv, in the very beginning, we had a few families whose children had medical needs with some very specific drugs that they were taking. And they asked me because they know me for autism stuff, right? But I don't deal in medicines. It's not what my organization does. So instead, I referred them to a wider volunteer organization that was in Kyiv, that they were supplying people with medicines and other basic needs. And I told them to ask there, and they had what they needed within a day. So what sort of stuff can be given over to other bigger organizations to lighten your load? Do that, coordinate with them, cooperate with them. It will help a lot. It helped me a lot when I could tell people, hey, you can ask those guys for help. And for this help, okay, you come to me and I tell you what to do. So it's great. Things that cannot be covered by other organizations tend to be autism specific stuff. So services, sensory items, other adjustments that are required for autistic folks, advocacy for adjustments. For example, if an autistic child or teenager student is going to school, they may need an IEP. Their parents won't know how to get it. So you may need to help them to advocate at school, for example, to allow the student to have ear defenders. So things like that. See where you can lighten your load and see where it's you who is needed. Here's a few common items that are very helpful with autistic children in general, and especially the ones who've been through the war. So sound muffling headphones, it can be in-ear like loop, which I have. It can be over-ear ear defenders. Generally, autistic kids will be more used to the over-ear. Not all of them can deal with something being stuck inside. Why is it important? You learn to listen for the sound of missiles. That's the thing. I was in Kyiv and I learned to listen for them too. And when you get out, for the first months, it can be a heavy truck passing by you on the street, or just outside your windows. It can be a helicopter flying over. It can be an airplane flying over, and you will react to it. You can't help it. You flinch. Your flight response goes like this because your body is trying to keep you safe, because your mind and body have learned that when you listen those sounds, you hide. You hide where you can. You go in the basement. If you're on the street, you find a ditch to jump into because you don't know what's going to blow up. And the severity of the reaction will depend on what the family went through and which area they were in. So, for example, my reaction was, for the first months of being outside of Ukraine, my reaction was to flinch and look for the source of sound, because in my brain, logically, I knew that I was safe, but I had to convince myself of that. So I actively rewrote what I learned in my head by being like, oh, it's just an airplane, like British Airways flying over, or, oh, it's just a train going by. So I had to reteach myself to react differently for those sounds. And it's not just autistic kids, pretty much the whole family will be flinching or reacting to them in some way. It is stressful. So it's just a thing that's going to happen. For autistic persons, it helps to talk them through the sounds they will hear. I recommend doing it with the whole family. So if they're arriving to a noisy city or in a spot where there's airplanes flying over or helicopters, warn them ahead of time. It's like, hey, we have airplanes flying over, it's fine. Or, we live by a busy street, so it's fine if you hear them. Or we have a garbage truck coming in at 5 a.m. So don't freak out if you hear weird beeping noises and all of those sounds in the morning. And it helps to talk them through as they hear it. So you hear an airplane flying over, you see the family flinch, like, oh, look, it's an airplane flying over. It will help them to retrain themselves to not react to those sounds. But still, it takes time. For me, it took a month. For my brother, he's autistic and 16 right now. It took even longer. And definitely try to avoid, if they have a host family, warn them to avoid watching movies that have sounds of explosions and shooting in them, because they will react, and autistic children will react a lot more to it, and you don't want to trigger them. In general, the pressure can be weight toys or a body sock, as you can see on the screen, the blue thing, tends to help autistic people to sort of feel their body and relax. A nice hot bath helps some of them. Some of them are happy with a shower. So again, that's why you ask their parents for what are their sensory needs and preferences. There's also a number of things that help them feel safe. It can be a favorite toy. Here in the picture, you see one of the girls who are autistic and in Ukraine with her Lula doll, which we found was super helpful for the families. What it does is it simulates the sound of breathing and heartbeat. And we got a fantastic response from the families. They say that children started sleeping through the night. Parents also say that they sleep with their child and with the doll, both of them listening to those sounds, because it makes both of them feel safe. If you can get hands on those dolls, it can be a different brand. I know there's dolls for like puppies that have also breathing and heartbeat sounds. Those have been super helpful. Feel safe items can also include phones, because a lot of autistic kids and teens are attached to their phones, or it can be whatever they have for gaming. Usually it's a parent's phone or a tablet. And after COVID, after having to sit in a basement, not being able to leave anywhere, their phones or mobile devices will be quite important to them. And of course, favorite snacks and foods, because as we know, autistic people tend to be very selective in what they eat, and with added stress of being in a new place, finding their footing when it comes to food is going to be difficult. I'm going to say it right now, things taste different in Canada. I've been to Canada and I've been to USA, so I can compare with what we have in Ukraine, and the foods will taste different. So don't just assume that a cucumber in Canada will taste the same as cucumber in Ukraine. They're different, their texture, their taste, their look, everything is different. So once the parents arrive, or before, if you have contact with them, if you can find a brand that is the same that sells one in Ukraine, we all know globalization exists. So chances are you will be able to find something close enough, or maybe even the same brand, but it will be very helpful. Now, there are children who are prone to eloping, as in running away when they feel panicked. They aren't really able to control themselves. They just take off and run, and a lot of them don't remember running. They just remember the trigger, and then they sort of come to senses when they're far away, and they're like, oh, where am I? So GPS tags would be super helpful for kids who tend to elope. There's also those who tend to do self-harm. Now, in those cases, you will have to work with a professional, with a specialist who knows how to deal with it, but it is always safety first. So safety of the child, safety of yourself and whoever is around. Something to be aware of. Right, this is quite a heavy slide, but we'll get through that. Now, teenagers, children may have PTSD, depression, anxiety, which will be undiagnosed because, well, in Ukraine, it is a psychiatrist who can diagnose autism, and it's not a very robust system in there just yet. So if a child or a teenager has a comorbid condition or has developed one, chances are it will not be diagnosed. But after COVID, after war, it is very likely that families coming in, their children will have one of those three, or maybe even all of them. You don't know, but it's good to be aware of the possibility, and that maybe the child or teenager needs to be reassessed to see what their issues are and what sort of help they need. One of the important pieces to know is that while it's hard to spot in autistic people, what you need to do is look for the new symptoms. So whether you're the one assessing them or if you're just helping them get assessed, talk to the specialist and tell them, hey, you need to look at the history. You need to look at the new symptoms. Which symptoms did not exist before the war? Which symptoms did not exist until the family got out? Which symptoms got worse? Which ones disappeared? What are the new behaviors? So it needs to be like a full-on investigation. Too often I see autism specialists assume that it's just an autistic thing, and then the child doesn't get the treatment they need. So for example, one of the families I know, their child who is in early teenage years, once they got out, he started smearing his excrements on the back of the sofa. And he is verbal, and when asked, he does not remember doing it. So the mother takes her son, goes to a specialist. What does a specialist say? They say, oh, it's he needs sensory diet, and he's playing with his poop, so he should be given clay, brown clay to play with, because the sensory is very similar. What the specialist doesn't care about is that it is a new sign, it's a new behavior, and it's most likely some form of trauma response. So this is where you will need to heavily advocate for it. Anxieties can be any sort of shape or topic. Food anxiety is one that I've dealt with closely because my brother got super anxious about food while we were in Kiev, and because he heard us discussing it, and Soviet habits die hard. So we had a huge freezer with meat, butter, and what have you. So we could have lived for, I don't know, a solid week, 2 weeks without any new food being delivered to the house. And me and dad regularly went out to grab new food, so we weren't eating our stores. But my brother started to self-ration. Now he's a growing boy, right? So he eats a lot normally. But then I noticed him eating like a little bird, and I was like, are you okay? He's like, well, I don't want to eat too much. because I don't want us to be left without food. So back home in Kiev, I had to repeatedly reassure him that it's fine, we have the food, eat your fill, grab your seconds if you want to, it's fine. But still inside, he didn't really internalize it. And when we got out, he was very anxious about having food in the house, about having easy access to food. We stayed in a village until I found us a flat closer to the city. And in that village, there wasn't any proper grocery stores, so we had to order delivery, and it did not help with his anxiety. And he started to compensate for it, which wasn't really healthy. But once we got out and he got the ability to just go to the supermarket, grab what he needs and get back home, he started to feel a lot safer and a lot calmer about food. Very likely that you will see something similar. Food anxiety can also show in hoarding food. So which can be dangerous if the food easily spoils. So if a person feels the need to hoard the food, do not stop them. It will only make them hide it harder. Provide them with food that doesn't really spoil. So it can be cookies, it can be other snacks, that maybe a mini fridge in their room, so they constantly have this access to food and they feel secure, which is what you want to do. The more secure the person feels, the easier it will be for them to adapt and work on that trauma. Separation anxiety, also a big one, because families got torn apart. The fathers are all left in Ukraine. Could be their brothers, their cousins, their uncles, whatever, but it's still super traumatic, really stressful. And most of those kids, they don't get a proper explanation or an explanation that they actually need. And no one can tell them the answer to, when will I see my father again? And they don't know if one of those Russian bombs will fall on the house, because Russians are just shelling civilian targets. So they don't know if their dad will wake up the next morning. It's just luck at this point. Dealing with separation anxiety is not easy. Also, it can show up in different ways. One of the ways that I've seen is that the son attempts to control his mother because the situation feels so out of control. He's trying to grab control where he can. So he doesn't leave her out of sight. If she goes away, she must check in with him via text messages. And in general, he is very anxious. If she's gone for over an hour, he will go searching for her. So those things, they need to be worked at with a therapist, or they need to be worked around. It's one of the more complicated pieces to talk about. Agoraphobia. So when the war started, autistic people needed to learn the new rules. The new rules were that outside is not safe because you don't know when Russian shelling is going to fall on top of you. You have to listen for the sirens. If you hear the sirens, you have to go hide. So some of the kids have a hard time leaving the building they're in because the building feels safe and outside feels unsafe. It's something to be aware of and something to warn the psychologist or the specialist, trauma specialist, autism specialist. If you can get a team working on with the child, that would be fantastic. Anyway, hyper awareness, because you have to be aware of what's going on around you to stay safe. The severity, again, will depend on what the family went through and where they were. If they were in occupied areas, if they were in the areas that were heavily shelled, like Kharkiv, or if they were in more sort of relatively peaceful places like Lviv. Either way, you will have hyper awareness where they flinch in every sound. I already talked about this. Or maybe they try to visually keep track of where is the exit, where is the window, where is my safe spot, and if I need to dive into a ditch when something is flying over my head. Because yes, that is what people develop in cities that get shelled on the regular. They get used to looking for the ditch that they will jump into in case they hear a missile flying over them. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the hypo awareness, which is again, example of my brother. Leaving Ukraine overstressed him and he basically shut down. Dad told him to just follow me and follow my directions, and my brother did all that, but he wasn't aware of anything else. So he wasn't aware of what he had for breakfast when we stopped in Budapest before our flight. He wasn't aware that we flew like business class because that's the tickets we got. He wasn't aware when we came. Thankfully, we were in a village, so not a lot of cars on the streets, but he wasn't aware of the cars. And that was like a week, or yeah, that was like a week into being away from Ukraine. I had to pull him from the roadside because he was just, I don't know, he wasn't paying attention. He wasn't aware of it. In his own words, oh, I didn't notice. So hypo-awareness is a defensive reaction, which you do see in autistic people, which is when the world becomes too much, they hide into their shell and their brain just shuts off a lot of their sensory abilities, so they don't feel, they don't notice. Also tied to trauma as well, and it can show up in different ways. So from not noticing environment to not noticing the injuries, which is quite dangerous, and also not noticing what they are being told. So again, my brother, I told him, hey, I arranged a dinner with our uncle. It will be in 3 days. He goes like, yeah, sure. And then on the day, I was like, hey, you remember we got the dinner? Yeah, sure. Hey, we have like an hour before the dinner. So just, you know, so you're aware. It's like, yeah, sure. And then I came in and I was like, okay, we have 5 minutes. You need to get dressed. And goes like, where? What's going on? I'm like, the dinner. What dinner? Like the dinner with our uncle, the one I told you about at least 5 times by now. You never told me about the dinner. And he's been genuine, even though he responded. So it went away after a while as he processed what happened to him. But still, hypo-awareness can be dangerous. And there are autistic kids who are prone to it, where they don't notice the danger around them, or they don't understand the danger around them. So typically the parents will tell you if their kids are prone to like running across the street, even if it's cars or whatever. Attempts to control the environment, also fairly typical reaction for autistic kids when they feel that the situation is out of control and unpredictable. So explain as much as possible to them. Keep things predictable. If there can be a visual schedule, so like a little calendar with images, or a simple board with now, then cards, set up the rules, make it clear, make it structured, so they have something to lean on. That's also, it will help to print out PECS cards if you know that the child is minimally verbal or non-verbal just yet. You can also ask parents if they use cards like PECS, P-E-C-S. It's a very common system. If you Google it, there's plenty of free packs which explain pretty much everything in the world, from how to brush your teeth to daily schedule, going to school, lessons, etc. Right. So moving back a bit, when you get out of Ukraine, you feel a bit like a zombie. Everything new, everything strange. It doesn't feel quite real because like the difference from where you were and where you are now is just so huge. And you put a lot of effort into keeping yourself together, keeping track of your child, and keeping everything together until you get to the finish line. So getting to that flat you're assigned, or a host family, or a house, whatever, is the finish line. And that's when the batteries die out. And well, me, I was only able to do the bare minimum. So I would ensure there was food in the house, that my brother was fed, that we had internet, and that was pretty much it. I couldn't really do anything else because it was so overwhelming. Some people will have a bit more of a runtime, so they will try and dive headfirst into work or into organizing things for their kids, or like services, etc. But then they will crash. So we're talking about pretty severe burnout and people trying to ignore it, because the moment they stop, they feel like this whole trauma and this emotional situation is going to catch up to them and tumble them over like a huge wave. And it's intimidating and it's scary, and it helps to have a trusted person to cry on, because obviously you're not going to cry on your kid's shoulder. They're not there for that. So yeah, it's pretty hard, and just be ready that this crash, this burnout, it will come at some point, sooner or later. Also, I know when the family settles in, there's a lot of information that they need to know, but a lot of information at once, they're not really going to take it in. So break it down into little chunks. If you can have a booklet which explains the basics that they can look at later, that's also great. Things people think of first when they get out: call home. So prepaid SIM for internet calls is very important for them. And of course, they will be keeping up with the news. So when there's severe shelling in Ukraine, or if their hometown was hit, their mental state is going to take a turn for the worse. And I'm talking about parents, and I'm talking about autistic folks who have access to internet and ability to follow the news. So little welcome booklet, local SIM card, they will need a local bank account. Maybe there are some banks which run special programs for Ukrainians. So here in the UK, it's HSBC, which they give out loans at lower rates for Ukrainians. A few days in, once the family gets their bearing, the adults will start looking for a job. They will start looking out for, hey, maybe I can find myself a home. They will need to figure out the transport. Maybe there's local transport. Maybe they need to have a car. Maybe a bicycle is enough in your area, but they will need to know that, including a map of the area with points of interest marked. Very useful. For example, again, grocery stores, clothing stores. If you have secondhand stores, also useful. Things like that, maybe a nice park, nearby school. So things like that would be super helpful. And the biggest hurdle is bureaucracy. So all of those things are listed, and also signing up for the medical services. I don't know how it works in Canada, but in here you need to register with a local GP, which is whom you need to work with to get anything medical that you need. Finding equivalents to the medicines that they regularly take, also, they will be looking for that. So if you can have like a little folder, it's probably, yeah, a little folder or a booklet with printouts or what have you, is a very good source. Right, other bits and pieces. Burnout, I already said before, parents will absolutely prioritize their kids' needs ahead of them, up to the point of completely ignoring their own needs, especially when it comes to mental health, and run themselves dry. A thing to know is that there is a big stigma for mental health, for needing a psychologist in Ukraine. We've been working on it, as have other organizations that are tied to mental health, but trying not to suggest that a parent sees a therapist or a psychologist, because they will not take it well. Lob it softer, frame it as, you know, someone to talk to, or, you know, someone to help you get through this, because this is a very complicated thing that you're going through. A little bit softer. Some people will have an easier time talking to a pastor because, well, if they went to church, then they're used to trusting the pastor, or their religion's equivalent. It's they could be Jewish, they could be Muslim. We have those religions are pretty widespread in Ukraine as well. Having a community really helps, because it helps you realize that you're not alone. An extra level of difficulty comes with autistic families, because they tend to self-isolate. So they will need special accommodations, for example, events that don't get too loud, or the ones where the child is allowed to run about and get their energy out. So all of those things, feeling of helplessness, of being useless, are also very prevalent as a survivor's guilt. So being able to work is important. Being able to do something for Ukraine is also important. So once they, sort of find their feet mentally, you might want to say, hey, like if you want to, we have those Ukrainian themed events. Maybe there's a donation drive that they can help out with, not financially, but by doing something. I know some autistic kids who felt very bad for not being able to kill Russians themselves, but they were convinced to do art or write letters for Ukrainian soldiers on the front line. One of the kids actually ran away from home, found some soldiers and asked them to join. The kid was 8 and he wanted to join the army. Thankfully, the soldiers figured out where his home was, found the parents and got the child back and convinced him that you're a bit too small just yet, but you can like do stuff like writing us letters. We'll be very happy to hear from you. So there is always an alternative. And another important bit is that people are traumatized and there are no words to explain how much everyone hates Russians. If you are Russian or if you have Russian ancestry, don't take it personally. Don't try to convince them that there is decent Russians. It will not be taken well and you will be just seen as a person they cannot be honest with. Because emotionally, this is a very honest thing to say. I want something like, I want all Russians dead. And it takes a very long time to sort of heal and realize that, well, there's people with Russian ancestry who had literally nothing to do with the situation because, for example, their family has lived in Canada for 3 generations, or they just speak Russian, but quite a few people will have a hard time making the distinction. So don't tell them to be tolerant, let them heal first. If you want them to trust you, just let them heal and try to get them someone to talk to. It's like that. It's just is. Yeah, hard as it is. So there's a community near me. It's a Pierce Church, and they've been doing quite a lot for the Ukrainian community here. So a lot of ideas I basically copied from what they did. So they had the folders which you could look through and find free groups for young children, classes for older children, free English lessons, a way to get a free bicycle, which I took advantage of because bicycles here cost £200 and that is very expensive. So they hooked me up with a decent bicycle, which I use a lot right now. They also help Ukrainians find their schemes, discounts and whatnot. They donate clothing on the regular. They have meetups every Wednesday with food provided. Just so many things they do, just coming together as a community and giving Ukrainians this chance to meet up and be a community. It's fantastic. They also have special events. They had a really cool one for the Ukrainian Independence Day, which is where the photo is from. So those things, they help a lot. And, you can reach out to the churches nearby. Majority of Ukrainians are either agnostic or Christian in some way, some more, some less, but in general, church is, important in Ukrainian culture. So churches also make fantastic centers for these events. They have huge networks. They get donations on the regular. They're big organizations who can take a lot of things that I talked about on themselves instead of relying just on you as volunteers. So don't be shy, reach out to your local churches and reach out to the bigger ones. And that concludes my presentation. And I do believe we have exactly 15 minutes for the questions. And stop share.
All right, I'll go first. Oh, Nadia, do you want to say something?
Sorry, I just wanted to really thank you. It was extremely valuable and just, so many good points. And obviously from experience, all these things. So it's not theoretical, but very practical. And thanks very much. It's great.
Yeah. I try not to get too much into what people go through in Ukraine, because that would be a separate lecture. And I try to keep things to the like absolute essential stuff you need to know.
Irina, so here's our most burning question: housing. Right, Nadia? Yeah. So we've been trying to advocate to have parents with autistic children to be provided with separate housing units where they can come and have their privacy, because currently our system doesn't provide separate housing, and we rely on host families. But as you say, there is stigma in Ukraine. Well, there is still, unfortunately, stigma here that I tell somebody the child is autistic, right away they think, oh, he's gonna fall off the stairs, you know, totally unrelated thing, but parents are concerned. So we've been trying to advocate for that. And sometimes it's hard to explain that to a person who doesn't understand what it means to have an autistic child, because they're like, oh, what, they have blue blood, like they're, you know, these regal people who want a separate apartment, you know, we have a family living in a basement. How would you, with your experience, advocate for separate housing? Why would you say that it is important for them to be given somewhere where they can shelter and have their quiet and their peace?
Well, first off, autism, like the main bit of it is, well, the main two bits of it. First one is sensory issues, which are quite obvious, and they can be explained without going into, oh, this person is autistic. And a lot of adult people on the spectrum, on the autistic spectrum, they find it easier to explain their sensory needs as just, oh, I always wear a hat and dark glasses because I'm very sensitive to light. So bright light hurts my eyes. That's why I go around with those. Or I'm wearing, you know, earplugs because my hearing is so sensitive. Or my skin is very sensitive, so I need secondhand clothing or extra soft clothing, without saying I'm autistic, that's why I need this. Because autism is a very wide spectrum. Usually when people hear about autism, they either think about one of the shows, like Sheldon from Young Sheldon, or the Big Bang Theory. The Good Doctor is another good example of an autistic person in the media. So, like, you know, those are examples you can refer them to. And actually, Young Sheldon is a very good show because Young Sheldon is very autistic, and it's a very funny and good show for people to get introduced to the topic of autism. But in general, people think about 3-year-olds who are non-speaking, who are just running around screaming, and that's that. They don't realize that kids grow up into teenagers and into adults and are just fine. So often it can be, well, to the host families, it could be beneficial to say, hey, he has just list what are the needs of the child. And as for advocating for personal space, well, apart from sensory needs, which can be quite severe, especially after trauma, the other side is that autism is, first of all, a problem of communication. So the way I explain it is that, imagine that your brains, they run on Android. So here's my Android phone. I know how it works. It is very convenient to me. I know exactly how to work it, right? But then if I take an iPhone, the system on it is different, and it confuses me because all the things, all the swipes, all the buttons are not in the right place, and it just annoys me so much, and it drives me up the wall. Updating my grandma's iPod with the audiobooks she likes is a nightmare because it's a different operating system to what I'm used to. So it's two different operating systems. You can learn how to work with both, but it takes a lot of time and effort. You have to want to do this. And it's a very good way to explain the social side of autism. And I found that it works fantastic with kids and teens. It just clicks for them. The moment I compare like Windows and Apple, or Android and iPhones. But since it is, first of all, a social issue and a social, well, you know, problem, and on top of that, we have sensory issues. On top of that, we have trauma. For an autistic child being in a new place where they have constantly have social demands from families that they don't know is very, very hard. Imagine this like a battery, right? Every phone, again, a phone example, has a certain number of battery, right? You have phones which can last you the whole day or maybe even several days. Very nice. But then you have phones like this one, which have a massive screen and last me for a few hours. Autistic kids, especially with trauma, are the phone with a busted battery. They don't have enough energy, enough resources inside themselves to manage their anxieties, their fears, their trauma, PTSD, depression, whatever else they have, on top of their sensory difficulties, dealing with a new and scary world where they understand nothing of what is going on or very little of it. Everything is unfamiliar, everything is scary. And their social demands, I'm going back to my right hand again, but I've run out of fingers. There are social demands from the parent. There are social demands from several other people who are hosts. And the child is not going to be able to deal with it. Their battery will run out in 5 minutes flat. They need time and space to decompress, to feel safe. Because what is safe? Where is safe? In Ukraine, nowhere is safe. Like a family I know, they were in Berdyansk, which got occupied. They were not safe there. They managed to escape to Zaporizhia. They thought they were safe here, there in Zaporizhia, until this week, Russia bombed Zaporizhia and the house they were living in got bombed, and they were lucky they weren't there. Now they're in Kiev. But is that kid going to believe he's safe in Kiev? Because he already had to flee his home twice. So they need the time and space to recover. They can't focus on recovering if they're constantly bombarded with host families' social demands, with host family rules. And of course, you know, the child might have nightmares, they might scream during the night, which will annoy the host family. The child might have trauma response behaviors which are uncomfortable for the host family. See my example with the child who was smearing his excrement over the sofa. Even though he doesn't remember, it's just his trauma. It's not really his fault that he does it. He needs help. But how many host families can deal with that? So if the host family does not have experience with autism, I would say, unless you really know what kind of family you're joining with the host family, unless you know how the autistic child, what the autistic child is like. So if you have his like personal profile, I would say it's a bad idea.
Well, that is one of the troubles that we're finding is, you know, just mentioning, you know, the child could have special needs.
Yeah.
The hosts often back out at the last minute, which leaves us stranded. And corporate landlords often look for sustainable clients. So right away they ask if the parents, you know, have a job and so on. So this is a social issue plus a financial issue plus humanitarian matter, right? So it's never just one problem. It's a lot of problems rolled into one. I also have a question because last week we started to kickstarted a parent support group. And I really want this parent support group to work, right? With both the Ontario Autism was there to kind of answer questions from the provincial side in Canada, right? But it seems like everybody has their own problem and they all want to bounce up their problems, but it's not really a community feel yet. Do you have any suggestions as to better structured parent group?
So don't focus on the therapy side of it.
Okay.
Have it be a pizza night out, a movie night out, a let's play sports kind of day, a let's get your kids drawing kind of day. There has to be a common activity, because that part does help to bring everyone together. Because when it's therapy focused, people in Ukraine don't really know what to do with that. So I'm not surprised you're finding it hard to lead that kind of group. So make it an activity, preferably something where kids can do a thing and parents can either sit on the side and drink some wine or coffee, whatever, or where they can participate together as a family. Because what we found is that making it an event where people can do stuff works best. And just to roll back a little bit to the hosts, it's perfectly understandable that they're scared. So I think two things would need to happen. One, they get a very brief, like, what autism is, and ideally what autism is like for the child of the family they're supposed to take in. So for my brother, I would say that he's a bit picky about the food. He has poor volume control with his voice, so he can talk loud, but he will quiet down if you tell him. So he is fully verbal. He will understand you fully when you talk to him, but obviously English is a foreign language, so talk a bit slower than you normally would. He is super helpful, and he very much tries to be helpful. But if we were coming in fresh, I would tell them he's a bit out of it right now. He needs time to recover. So don't get upset if he is clumsy, or if he doesn't seem to hear you, or if he doesn't remember a thing you told him literally 2 seconds ago. Just please be patient with him, and give him like 2 weeks and he will start coming out of it, because this is trauma. So I would explain it like that, rather than throwing, oh, my brother's autistic, at them, because that explains nothing. What also would be nice is if they could meet the family they're supposed to take in and sort of see for themselves that it's not that scary. I did a lot of lectures for the teachers, for schools in Ukraine, and what I see is that they're scared of the word autism, just the same as the host families are. But as I start to describe what autism looks like in classroom, like the shades and shapes of it, what it can look like in classroom, that often they already have an autistic child in their classroom. It's just not diagnosed, and everyone says, well, he's fine, it's just a weird kid. And as I go into it, I see them being like, oh, you know, that kid from 5A, oh, yeah, that kid, that's Serежa, that's like, he's spot on what she's talking about. All of a sudden they realize they already dealt with those kids, so it's not that scary. So same with the families. Don't throw the word autism at them. Tell them about the child, let them get to know the child. That's going to work a lot better, even if it does take an extra time and the family will need to stay somewhere else until the host family meets them.
I have a question, if you don't mind. If you're talking about working by groups with special children, as large can it be such group, as you think?
Yes. Yeah, it can be. So in Kiev, we had the social group for autistic kids, and it worked quite, like, it was working really well. For those kids, we did, you know, like getting them used to being around the city and accessing the like typical activities such as watching movies or going to a restaurant. So things that families do, but families with autistic kids tend to be cut out of for various reasons. What we had to do is we would talk to the business that we were going to visit. We would arrange a time where it's just our group in there. It can be just a time where they don't really have any clients. So for example, for movie theaters, it would be on a Tuesday. And we talk them through the accommodations we would need. So for example, extra space for the kids to run at, or in case with movies, lower sound, the lights would be halfway on and the kids would be allowed to move around the place, or walk out if they got overwhelmed. If you talk those through, absolutely can do those activities. The same with sports, art, and whatever else. Try to get it into the community, talk to the business first, then arrange a thing. Now, if you're talking about therapy groups, that is very different. If you're working specifically with therapeutic methods, you need at least one adult for 2 children and no less. Preferably, because I don't know what state the kids are in. Some children need constant hands-on work. Other kids are fine doing it by themselves. So I don't know what sort of group you have. Ideally, you would match them by ability, more or less. Sports tend to be a great way to get the kids moving and get the kids working. We have, well, had a very nice program in Kiev for that, and kids of different abilities could mingle and be together, and slowly go from just running marathons together as a group where, you know, they're sort of doing their own thing, but in a group, to being able to play sports things like football. And some kids went on to join youth clubs for the sport that they liked, that they got to try in the group. So with therapy, I would suggest a mix of individual and group sessions. That tends to work best because you can address the child's individual needs on the individual lesson, maybe teach them some skills, and then they get to practice it in a group session.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Of course, lastly, and of course, it's always good to mix autistic kids with neurotypical kids, because autistic kids, they need to join the world at some point, and the earlier you get them used to what people are like, the better it is.
Ireno, if I may ask, how big is the maximum group in regards to both the therapy session and in regards to a social activity? I mean, I know it all depends on the children.
A group of 10 tends to work quite well. So let's say 10 children. Mm-hmm. If there is like a joint thing that they're doing. So a group of 10 for sports works just fine. A group of 10 for going to museum, event, whatever, also works fine. As long as their parents are there and they're willing to at least somewhat keep an eye on the kids. And of course, it depends on the kids' levels, because again, if the kids needs constant hands-on assistance, you're looking at more volunteers to help that, to step in and to keep control of the group.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina. I think we gained a lot of valuable information today, and for sure we'll share this presentation with the autism organizations that are not working on the weekend, but you know, are definitely all ears during the week, because you raised a lot of very, very important points here. And some of them we actually even haven't really thought about. So, you know, your experience and your exposure to these families really, really shows. Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody else had anything to say, but, you know, otherwise I hate to keep you on a Saturday.
You are a wealth of information, and the presentation was phenomenal. I know that in the beginning of our session, you mentioned that you could share the PDF of the slides.
Yes.
Would you be okay if we sent them onward to like Canada Autism Speaks Canada and Ontario Autism? We are closely working with these groups, and they're kind of helping us with certain things, but we feel like we also need to give some awareness as to what is coming up from the Ukrainian side. And I think that you summarized it perfectly in the presentation and in the slides. Honestly, a wealth of information. I'm very, very happy that you took the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Yes, feel free to share the PDF to wherever. I'm happy to repeat my lecture to those organizations, or if there's other organization in Canada that you want me to talk about. God, my throat's gone dry. I also do good like autism 101 kind of lectures. I have ones like for parents, for teachers. So I don't know, maybe you want to make an event for hosts who are supposed to host autistic kids. And I would be happy to give a lecture to them if they want to know more about that.
There, speaking of hosts, there is a host that's hosting a woman with a child. The child is 2.5 years old. And it seems like there are a lot of issues coming up from week to week. And I think they could benefit from a private session. Because
all right, yeah, that sounds like a consultation. It
is a consultation because considering the fact that they are now not considering having children of their own because they're freaked out.
Oh dear.
Yes. So it's more of a management situation at this point.
Yeah, 2.5 is a complicated age when it comes to autistic kids. They need like early intervention and yeah, possibly one of the hardest ages, but if you manage to get through like a good early intervention program, like you can get fantastic results.
Yeah, I mean, the mom is unprepared for anything either. It's hard for her as well. So early intervention program is something that we'd have to look into from our end as well.
Yeah, definitely do that. Don't leave families one-on-one with the kid without any information. That doesn't end well for anyone, including the child.
Yeah, that's a very complicated case because what ended up happening is that the mother didn't know her child is autistic. He was developing quite fine, and then with all the trauma, and after that,
the autistic bomb exploded
in a Chuguyev in the basement for a month. She said that her child completely turned into something else, and now they have a provisional diagnosis of autism, which means that most likely, and we are waiting for diagnostics.
Well, I am happy to do a consultation with them. You have my Facebook, so you can contact me there and arrange things. Yeah, I've talked to parents through that stage before. So hopefully you can get that mom and the host family on the line and I'll talk them through.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. It is very, very kind of you to take the time to talk to us today. And, you know, we're going to pass on the information, spread the word, do our advocacy. And I really hope that we can benefit, well, as many children as possible across Canada with this information.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for organizing too.